He just ended an era. 23 years in the making, and it's over in one phone call. No goodbye tour. No farewell game. No confetti. Just a quiet conversation on a Tuesday afternoon that shattered one of the most iconic partnerships in basketball history. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a purple and gold jersey is about to be folded up for the last time. And the man wearing it for 8 years, the man who brought a championship to a city starving for one, the man some call the greatest to ever touch a basketball, just told the Lakers something nobody wanted to hear. He's gone. Not retired. Gone. Off to write one more chapter somewhere else. And by the time this video ends, you're going to understand exactly why, exactly how it happened, and exactly where the basketball world thinks he's headed next. So stay with me, because this story doesn't start on a Tuesday in June. It starts almost 25 years ago, in a small city in Ohio, with a kid who had absolutely nothing and a dream that felt impossible. Picture Akron, Ohio, in the late 1990s. It's not a glamorous place. It's a working-class city, cracked sidewalks, cold winters, the kind of town where dreams often stay small because life gives you enough to worry about without adding big ones. In this town lived a boy raised by a teenage mother who loved him fiercely but struggled constantly just to keep a roof over both their heads. They moved constantly, more than a dozen times before he even finished elementary school. Some nights, stability was a stranger's couch. Some weeks, it was a shelter. This boy missed almost 100 days of school in 4th grade alone, not because he didn't want to learn, but because his life was in constant motion, and there was no ground steady enough to stand on. But somewhere in the chaos, this kid found one thing that never moved. A basketball court. It didn't matter if the hoop was bent, or the net was torn, or the ball barely bounced right. On the court, everything made sense. And when a local youth football coach and his wife saw how bright and talented this kid was, they made a decision that would quietly change basketball history. They took him in. They gave him a bed that didn't change every week. They gave him a school he could actually attend consistently. And for the first time, this kid could focus on something other than survival. He could focus on becoming great. By the time he reached high school, whispers about this kid were turning into shouts. Local newspapers wrote about him. Then national magazines. Then television networks. Teenagers don't usually end up on the cover of Sports Illustrated while they're still trying to get their driver's license, but this one did. They called him the chosen one. That's an enormous weight to place on a 17-year-old's shoulders. Most people crumble under expectations like that. He didn't. If anything, he seemed built for it. In 2003, the NBA draft lottery landed in the perfect place for a storybook ending. The Cleveland Cavaliers, a struggling franchise from the same state this kid grew up in, won the first overall pick. And with that pick, they selected their hometown hero. LeBron James was going to play professional basketball for the team he grew up watching, in the state he grew up in, just 40 miles from where he'd once slept on friends' floors because his family had nowhere else to go. It felt like fate. And for a while, it played out like a fairy tale. He was electric from his very first game, a teenager outplaying grown men who had been in the league for a decade. Highlight reels of him became appointment viewing. But raw talent alone doesn't win championships, and for years, the Cavaliers around him simply weren't good enough to get him over the hump. He carried mediocre rosters to the playoffs through sheer will. In 2007, he dragged an underwhelming Cleveland team all the way to the NBA Finals, where they were swept by a more experienced San Antonio Spurs squad. It was a signal. He had the talent to compete with anyone. But talent alone wasn't enough. He needed more help than Cleveland could give him. By 2010, the frustration had built up for years. Every offseason, fans in Cleveland held their breath, wondering if this would be the year the front office finally surrounded him with real championship pieces. It never quite happened. And so, in the summer of 2010, in a decision that shook the sports world to its core, LeBron announced on live television that he was leaving Cleveland to join the Miami Heat, teaming up with 2 other elite superstars to try and build something unstoppable. The reaction was explosive. Cleveland felt betrayed. Fans burned his jersey in the streets. The city that once celebrated him as their prodigal son suddenly saw him as a traitor. Sports commentators debated for weeks whether he had damaged his legacy beyond repair. But in Miami, something powerful was brewing. Alongside his new teammates, he reached the NBA Finals in every single one of his 4 seasons there. He wasn't just talented anymore. He was dominant, methodical, terrifying to opponents. In 2012 and again in 2013, he lifted the championship trophy, silencing at least some of his critics. He had proven he could win it all. But something was still missing. A part of him wanted to go home. In 2014, he stunned the basketball world again, this time by returning to Cleveland. He didn't sneak back quietly. He wrote an open letter explaining his reasoning, expressing a desire to bring a championship to the region that raised him, to the fans who had once burned his jersey but never truly stopped loving him. It was a redemption arc unfolding in real time. And in 2016, it happened. Against a Golden State Warriors team that had just set the all-time record for regular season wins, Cleveland fell behind 3-1 in the finals, a deficit no team in NBA history had ever overcome. Most people had already written the obituary for Cleveland's championship hopes. But something remarkable happened. Game after game, he refused to let the season end. He willed his team back from the brink, culminating in one of the most iconic defensive plays in league history, a chase-down block in the closing minutes of Game 7 that many consider one of the single greatest moments in basketball history. Cleveland won its first championship in over 50 years. Grown men wept in the streets. A city that had known nothing but heartbreak in sports finally got to celebrate. He had done exactly what he promised. He came home and delivered. But basketball careers, even legendary ones, eventually reach new crossroads. In 2018, with his prime years ticking by and Cleveland's roster once again thinning out around him, he made the decision to head west, signing with the Los Angeles Lakers. This wasn't just a basketball move. It was a cultural one. The Lakers are one of the most storied, most valuable, most star-studded franchises in the history of American sports. Bringing him into that fold meant merging 2 enormous legacies into one. His first season in Los Angeles was rocky. Injuries piled up. The team missed the playoffs entirely, something almost unthinkable for a LeBron James-led roster. Critics wondered aloud if age was finally catching up to him, if this move west had been a mistake. But the following season, everything clicked. The front office brought in another top-tier superstar to play alongside him, and the two of them formed a devastating partnership. The Lakers stormed through the regular season as one of the best teams in basketball. Then, midway through that 2019 to 2020 season, tragedy struck. Kobe Bryant, the Lakers legend who had defined the franchise for 2 decades, died in a helicopter crash along with his daughter and several others. The city of Los Angeles was gutted. The Lakers organization was gutted. And in the middle of unimaginable grief, this team had to find a way to keep playing basketball, carrying the weight of an entire fanbase's mourning on their shoulders. Then, just months later, the world itself came to a stop. A global pandemic shut down the NBA season entirely. When the league eventually returned, it did so under conditions nobody had ever experienced before. Every remaining team was sequestered inside a sealed campus in Florida, cut off from families, cut off from the outside world, playing basketball in empty arenas with no fans in the stands. It became known as the bubble, and playing there for months on end tested players' mental endurance as much as their physical skill. Somehow, in the middle of all that isolation and grief, this team found its focus. Game after game, round after round, they advanced through the bubble playoffs. And in October of 2020, they won the championship, delivering a title to a city and a franchise still healing from the loss of one of its greatest icons. He was named Finals MVP, becoming the first player in NBA history to win that award with 3 different franchises. It was a triumph forged in one of the strangest, most difficult circumstances professional basketball has ever seen. That championship should have been the beginning of a dynasty. Instead, it became the high point of a run defined by inconsistency. Injuries, roster turnover, front office decisions that didn't always pan out. The following seasons brought early playoff exits, a run to the Western Conference Finals in 2023 that ended in a sweep, and years where the team simply couldn't build sustained continuity around its aging superstar. And yet, Through it all, he kept performing at a level that defied basic logic for a man well into his 30s, then his 40s. In February of 2025, the Lakers pulled off a trade that stunned the entire league, acquiring a dazzling young superstar guard from Dallas in a deal that nobody saw coming. It signaled the franchise's plan for the future, building a bridge from one era to the next, pairing their aging icon with a rising star who could eventually carry the torch forward. This past season, that partnership showed flashes of brilliance, but injuries once again complicated things. During the first round of the playoffs, both of the team's other stars were sidelined at different points, and it was the 41-year-old veteran who stepped up, willing an undermanned roster to a series win over a tough opponent. It was a reminder that even in what many assumed were the twilight years of his career, he could still take over a basketball game when it mattered most. But the second round told a harsher story. The Lakers ran into a younger, deeper, more athletic team and were swept in 4 straight games. Just like that, the season was over. And for the first time in a long time, serious questions began circulating. Was this finally it? After 23 seasons, after 4 championships, after becoming the league's all-time leading scorer, after redefining what athletic longevity even meant in professional sports, was the greatest chapter of his career finally closing for good? For weeks, nobody knew the answer. He stayed quiet. No press conferences, no dramatic statements, no hints on social media. Just silence, while speculation swirled across every corner of the basketball world. Some analysts were convinced retirement was coming. Others believed he still had at least one more season left in the tank, insisting his body and his competitive fire hadn't faded nearly as much as his critics assumed. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Free agency in the NBA doesn't creep up quietly. It arrives like a storm all at once, the moment front offices are legally allowed to start negotiating with players whose contracts have expired. This year, that window opened on a Tuesday evening at the end of June. Teams across the league had been preparing for weeks, clearing salary cap space, lining up trade packages, positioning themselves to make their pitch the second the clock struck 6. But hours before that window even opened, before a single official conversation could legally take place, something happened that nobody expected. He made his decision, and instead of waiting for the frenzy of free agency to unfold around him, he chose to handle it with quiet respect. He reached out directly to the Lakers front office. He wanted them to hear it from him first, not from a leaked report, not from a reporter's phone buzzing at midnight. He explained that after taking time to reflect following the disappointing end to the season, he had decided he still wanted to chase something meaningful. He wanted to keep playing at the highest level, competing for championships, pushing his body through one more grueling NBA season. But he had come to the difficult conclusion that his future in that pursuit wouldn't be in Los Angeles. His representative, the CEO of his management agency, delivered the news to reporters that evening. Within minutes, it exploded across every sports outlet in the country. Breaking news alerts lit up phones everywhere. Fans who had gone 8 years assuming this partnership would simply end whenever he decided to retire were suddenly staring at a completely different reality. He wasn't done playing basketball. He was just done playing it in Los Angeles. The Lakers organization responded with grace. The team's governor released a heartfelt statement, calling him one of the greatest athletes in history, thanking him for the championship he delivered under some of the most difficult circumstances the league had ever faced, and acknowledging the records he shattered while wearing their uniform. She wished him well in whatever came next, both on the court and off it, and made clear that as far as the organization was concerned, he would always be part of the Lakers family. He responded publicly as well, expressing genuine gratitude for the years he spent in that uniform, saying it had been an honor to represent the franchise and that he hoped he'd made people proud during his time there. It was a respectful, almost businesslike parting, remarkably different in tone from the raw emotional wounds of his earlier departure from Cleveland over a decade earlier. There was no jersey burning this time. No sense of betrayal. Just a mutual acknowledgement that 8 remarkable years had run their course, and it was time for both sides to move forward separately. For the young Dallas transplant who had been paired alongside him just a season and a half earlier, this news carried enormous weight. With the elder statesman gone, the keys to the franchise now belong fully to him. He's no longer the new addition learning the ropes next to a legend. He's the face of the Lakers now, tasked with carrying an entire storied franchise forward into its next era. That's an enormous burden, but it's also an enormous opportunity, and how he handles it will shape the direction of one of basketball's most valuable franchises for years to come. There's another layer to this story that made the timing especially interesting. Just one day before this announcement broke, the Lakers made a separate decision that quietly spoke volumes. His son, a young guard who had been playing limited minutes for the team, had a contract option that needed to be decided on. The front office chose to fully guarantee that deal, keeping him on the roster rather than releasing him. Father and son had made history together just 2 years earlier, becoming the first father-son duo to ever share an NBA court at the same time. Many assumed that emotional bond might factor into where the father chose to sign next. But as this story developed, it became clear his son wasn't necessarily following him out the door. The son appears likely to remain with the Lakers, while the father begins a completely separate chapter elsewhere. It's a small but fascinating subplot buried inside a much bigger story. Now here's where things get really interesting, because the question burning up every sports talk show, every fan forum, every group chat across the country right now is simple. Where does a 41-year-old, four-time champion, all-time leading scorer go from here? The early frontrunner appears to be the Golden State Warriors. 4 months leading up to this announcement, insiders had been buzzing about the Warriors' interest, and the timing of certain other roster moves only fueled the speculation further. Just before free agency opened, one of Golden State's longtime defensive anchors declined a massive player option worth well over $20 million, a move widely interpreted as clearing the path for exactly this kind of blockbuster addition. The Warriors, according to several league insiders, have been quietly building toward assembling an absolutely stacked veteran core, one that would pair this newly available superstar with a future Hall of Fame point guard already on their roster, along with their longtime defensive stalwart and, potentially, another former MVP-caliber big man acquired through trade. If that vision comes together, it would represent one of the most star-studded veteran rosters basketball has ever seen, a group of players with a combined trophy case that would make almost any other roster in the league jealous. But Golden State isn't the only team dreaming big. 2 other franchises hold deep personal significance in this story, and both are reportedly circling as well. There's Miami, the franchise where he won 2 of his 4 championships, the place where he first proved he could dominate on the game's biggest stage outside of his home state. And then there's Cleveland, the team that drafted him, the team he tearfully returned to once before, the team whose city raised him from nothing into a global icon. A homecoming there for a second time would be one of the most poetic storylines in modern sports history, especially with Cleveland's roster looking for exactly the kind of championship experience and leadership someone in his position could provide after a disappointing playoff exit of their own this past postseason. Every path leads somewhere fascinating. Every option carries its own storybook potential. And right now, nobody outside of his innermost circle knows which direction he's actually leaning. What we do know is this: he's not walking away from the game. At 41 years old, heading into an unprecedented 24th NBA season, he's choosing to keep chasing greatness rather than ride off quietly into retirement. Most athletes in almost any sport are long retired by their mid-30s. He's preparing to suit up again in his 40s, still averaging over 20 points a game, still capable of taking over playoff series, still commanding the attention of the entire basketball world every time he steps onto a court. Think about what that actually means for a moment. When he entered the league back in 2003, the players he's chasing records against were legends from a completely different generation. He has outlasted rivals, outlasted teammates, outlasted entire eras of basketball style and strategy. He debuted in an NBA before smartphones existed. He's still playing at an elite level in a league now dominated by athletes who grew up idolizing him as children. That kind of longevity isn't just rare in basketball. It's almost unheard of in the entire history of professional sports. And now, that remarkable career is entering an entirely new and uncertain chapter. For 8 seasons, the story of the Los Angeles Lakers and the story of this legendary player were intertwined. They shared a championship forged in isolation and grief. They shared electrifying playoff runs and crushing early exits. They shared the arrival of a new superstar meant to carry the torch into the future. And now, they're going their separate ways, both stepping into uncertain new territory. The Lakers, meanwhile, aren't wasting any time moving forward. With his enormous salary now off their books, the front office suddenly finds itself holding a substantial amount of salary cap space, more than $50 million in flexibility to reshape the roster around their new franchise cornerstone. They've already been active, reportedly targeting talented big men to fill out the frontcourt and address needs at the wing position that his departure leaves wide open. This isn't a rebuild. It's a transition, one where a franchise built on decades of championship expectations pivots from one era-defining superstar to hopefully begin building around another. But make no mistake, this moment marks the true end of an era in Los Angeles. 8 seasons. 1 championship, one under conditions unlike anything the league had ever experienced. Countless unforgettable performances. A franchise record book rewritten in purple and gold. And now, a farewell delivered not with grand ceremony, but with quiet mutual respect between two parties who simply believe their futures now point in different directions. As for what comes next, the basketball world is holding its breath. Will he choose the glittering possibility of joining a super team in Golden State, chasing one more ring alongside some of the greatest shooters and competitors of this generation? Will sentiment and history pull him back to Miami, the place where his championship legacy truly began outside of Ohio? Or will fate write one more improbable chapter, sending him home to Cleveland for a second emotional reunion, the city that has always considered him one of its own no matter where his career has taken him? Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. This isn't the end of his story. It's simply the closing of one remarkable chapter and the opening of another. 23 seasons in, and he's still writing basketball history in real time, still capable of shocking the world, still refusing to let anyone write his final act before he's ready to write it himself. Let's actually slow down for a second and think about what leaving a franchise like the Lakers really means, because it's not just about stats or contracts. It's about identity. When a superstar signs with the Lakers, they're not just joining a basketball team. They're stepping into one of the most recognizable brands on the entire planet. The purple and gold jersey has been worn by some of the most legendary figures the sport has ever produced. Walking away from that isn't a small decision. It's walking away from a piece of basketball royalty, from a fan base spread across every continent, from a media spotlight that follows your every move whether you want it to or not. And yet, he's done something like this before. Twice, actually. Leaving Cleveland the first time in 2010 was gut-wrenching, both for him and for the city that raised him. He was villainized in a way few athletes ever have been. Talk shows dedicated entire segments to debating whether he had destroyed his legacy. But he pushed through that storm, won championships, and eventually returned home to deliver the very thing that city had been begging for since 1964. That's the kind of resilience that defines his career. Public opinion has swung against him before, and it never seemed to shake his focus for long. This departure from the Lakers feels different, though. There's no anger this time. No burning jerseys. No think pieces about betrayal. Maybe that's because the league itself has changed. Player empowerment, the idea that stars control their own destiny rather than being passive pieces moved around by front offices, has become the norm rather than the exception. Or maybe it's simply because, at 41 years old, after 23 seasons of unprecedented excellence, nobody has the heart to be angry at him anymore. He's earned the right to choose his own path, wherever it leads. Let's talk a little more about each of these potential landing spots, because each one tells a completely different story about what kind of ending he might be chasing. Start with Golden State. On paper, this might be the most tantalizing option of them all. Imagine a starting lineup featuring one of the greatest shooters in basketball history running the point, a defensive menace who's built an entire Hall of Fame case on toughness and hustle, a dominant two-way big man anchoring the paint, and the NBA's all-time leading scorer rounding out the group. That's not just a good team. That's a team built to terrify every single opponent on the schedule. The chemistry question looms large, of course. 4 accomplished stars sharing one basketball is always a delicate balancing act, and there's no guarantee that egos, shot attempts, and playing time would sort themselves out smoothly. But if it works, if these veteran champions can mesh their games together, the ceiling on a roster like that is almost limitless. It would be, without exaggeration, one of the most star-studded collections of talent ever assembled on one court. Then there's Miami, a franchise with deep emotional roots in his story. It was there, alongside two other future Hall of Famers, that he transformed from a spectacular talent into an undeniable champion. The culture in Miami is built around toughness, conditioning, and an almost obsessive commitment to winning, values that have always seemed to resonate with him. A return there wouldn't be as flashy a storyline as a super team reunion in Golden State, but it carries its own kind of magnetic pull. It would mean going back to the place where he first tasted ultimate success outside of his home state, closing a loop that started way back in 2010. And finally, there's Cleveland, which might be the most emotionally charged possibility of all three. This is the team that drafted him as a teenager, the team he first left in heartbreak, the team he returned to and delivered a championship that ended over 50 years of suffering for an entire city. Going back a second time would almost feel like something out of a movie script, a hometown hero returning not once, but twice, to try and add one final storybook chapter to a franchise and a city that has never stopped claiming him as their own. Cleveland's roster, still hungry after a disappointing playoff sweep of their own this past postseason, could certainly use the kind of championship pedigree and leadership he'd bring instantly. It's a long shot compared to the buzz around Golden State, but in a career full of unpredictable twists, nobody would be shocked if this is exactly how the story ends. Whichever path he chooses, there's a bigger picture worth appreciating here. Think back to where this story started. A kid bouncing between apartments in Akron, missing school because his family had nowhere stable to live, finding whatever peace he could on a cracked outdoor basketball court. Nobody could have predicted that same kid would grow up to redefine what athletic greatness even looks like, to play at an elite level into his 40s, to become the leading scorer in the history of the most competitive basketball league on the planet, to win championships with 3 different franchises across 3 different decades. That's not just an incredible sports story. That's one of the most remarkable comeback stories in the history of human achievement, and it's still being written right now, in real time, as we speak. It's also worth remembering just how many times people counted him out along the way, only to watch him prove them wrong again and again. After the 2007 finals sweep, critics said he needed real help to ever win a title. He went out and won 2 championships in Miami. After leaving Miami, some questioned whether Cleveland could ever build a contender around him again. He returned home and delivered the most memorable comeback in finals history, clawing back from a 3-1 deficit against a historically great opponent. When he joined the Lakers and missed the playoffs in his very first season, analysts openly speculated that age was finally slowing him down. The next year, he won Finals MVP in the middle of a global pandemic, becoming the first player ever to capture that award with 3 separate franchises. Every single time the basketball world has tried to write his final chapter early, he's torn up the script and written something even more remarkable instead. That pattern alone should make everyone pause before assuming this next chapter will be a quiet one. A 41-year-old choosing to leave the security and comfort of a franchise he's called home for 8 years, choosing instead to step into a brand new locker room, a brand new system, brand new teammates, all in pursuit of one more shot at a championship. That's not the decision of someone looking to coast toward retirement. That's the decision of someone who still believes, deep down, that he has more chapters left to write. There's also a fascinating generational storyline unfolding here that deserves attention. Across the league this offseason, seismic shifts have been happening everywhere, not just with him. Perennial all-stars are being traded to new franchises. Long-tenured superstars are requesting moves away from teams they helped define for years. It's as if an entire era of basketball is reorganizing itself all at once, the pieces of a decade-long puzzle being shaken up and rearranged into something new. His decision to leave the Lakers isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a much larger wave of change sweeping across the league this summer, a reminder that even the sport's biggest institutions are never as permanent as they seem. For Lakers fans, there's a strange mixture of emotions to process right now. Gratitude, certainly, For 8 years that included a hard-fought championship and countless unforgettable performances. But also a kind of nervous excitement, because this moment marks a genuine changing of the guard. The Dallas transplant who arrived in that stunning mid-season trade last year is no longer standing in anyone's shadow. He's the guy now, the face of one of the most historic franchises in American sports, tasked with proving he can carry that weight the way legends before him once did. That's an enormous burden for a young star still establishing himself, but it's also the exact kind of opportunity that turns very good players into legendary ones, if they're ready to seize it. And for him personally, whichever jersey he ends up wearing next season, there's something almost poetic about a player who has already accomplished nearly everything imaginable in this sport still choosing to chase one more chapter. He doesn't need another championship to validate his legacy. That was settled a long time ago. He's doing this because somewhere inside him, the competitive fire that turned a homeless kid from Akron into basketball royalty still burns exactly as hot as it did when he first stepped onto an NBA court as a teenager, over 2 decades ago. So here's the real question hanging over the entire league right now. When the dust finally settles, when the jersey numbers are announced and the introductory press conference cameras start flashing, which team gets to say they landed one of the greatest players to ever step onto a basketball court? Drop your prediction, because in a story this unpredictable, in a career defined by decisions nobody saw coming, the only thing we can say for certain is that the next chapter is going to be just as unforgettable as everything that came before it. Make sure you're subscribed because the moment his next team is officially announced, we'll be breaking down exactly what it means, for him, for that franchise, and for the rest of the league scrambling to catch up. This story is far from over. If anything, it's just getting started.